First speaker is Winnie Okello. She is the Strategic Community Relations Coordinator in the Environmental Justice Department at DEP. She is founder and operator of HARP, which stands for Harassment and Assault Reporting Platform. And she's a dedicated community organizer, as well as the founder of Winnie O Media. So please welcome to the stage, Winnie Okello.
Good evening, everybody out here. I think it's important that we have spaces such as this where we do talk about the importance of not just allowing but encouraging folks to use their voices to their vote, right? One of the things we often hear when we do this work is this idea of the democratic duty and access that people should have or do have. Not everybody has that, right? When you go back to, I'm a big words person, right? So democracy, etymology, right?
Yes.
Break that down?
Yes.
Right? Yeah, right? Greek rooted word, right? Demos meaning people and kratos meaning what? Power, right? Understanding that it's the people's power, power of the people, which one of the things I like to say, power to the people, by the people, for the people, right? And it's very important when we're talking about like who the people are, we have to be very intentional about how we define those things, because we understand definitions matter. One of the things that Campbell and I like to say, words matter, language matters, context matters. When we do this work, it's very important that we're very mindful of that moving forward. And that understanding, the reality is when we look at the current state of voting rights, right? We understand that far too often, especially quite recently, the people's votes, the people's decision was being challenged by frivolous entities. And it is important that when we get into spaces such as this, we need to be very intentional and we need to be very direct in calling out when inequity and injustice is enacted upon the people who we are voting into spaces that they're supposed to be speaking up for us. And it's important to also understand when we talk about democracy and power of the people and the people's voices and the people's votes, who stays silent when the people's decisions are being challenged through systemic and structural barriers that exist, right? So I know I'm throwing a lot at folks. If you haven't been all up in the Harrisburg and City Council shenanigans, it is a lot, and I think it's important that we give voice whenever possible to call out injustices wherever they occur, especially when they're being used to stifle people's right to vote. And so I know for myself, whether it is, talking about the annual budget or the strategic plan for the city or the environmental policies, because that's the space I oftentimes advocate in, both personally, professionally, purpose and passion. That's what I do. I'm really passionate about serving my community, serving the people beyond just Harrisburg, because environmental issues are not just restricted to Harrisburg. They're a state issue, they're a national issue, they're global issues. These are global issues, as I like to call them, globally local, where it's global issues, local approaches, local impact. Because what we do here in Harrisburg affects people who may be coming from various corners of this globe. And so I think it's important that we're mindful of that lens in doing this effort. And so, even as I work, as mentioned, through my work with HARP, which is the Harassment and Assault Reporting Platform, one of the spaces that I've found myself advocating a lot in is in the area of the decriminalizing folks who have been incarcerated and their rights to vote and to participate in the democratic process, understanding that those voices are oftentimes systematically and strategically just like squelched. It's like, we're okay listening to you, but in this space. And so what does that look like when we're looking to invite people to be intentional participants in restoring justice, true justice, not just legality, but true justice in the work that we do as community advocates, as Commonwealth and public servants. I think it's important that in all that we do, we truly are being inclusive of those marginalized and minoritized voices in the community among us, because it's one thing to say, yeah, go ahead, pay your penance, but when you come up, you still can't do the things that we told you you're allowed to do. I think we need to get real about that. So I will definitely wrap this up in saying also that when we talk about inviting folks to the proverbial decision-making tables. And I'll bring this into the EJ work because I've talked about environmental justice for way too many years. We see recently, even with a lot of the funding that's coming down from the federal level, right? This is not just about a vote for this cute thing. There's real dollars. Why do people vote? Why do they not vote? I think first and foremost, I will call it out. Our academic system has failed populations in terms of civic education. We have to be very cognizant as to why people are not showing up to vote. When you have a voting populace that about only a third of it participates, that's a problem, right? Because that means you're actually not really hearing the true voice of those you're supposed to be representing. So ask yourself, are we happy enough with the ones who are showing up? And if the ones who are showing up are being manipulated, then let's also understand why, right? If you're saying we want people to come out and vote, but yet when they come out you tell them, but not like that, that's a problem. I think we need to be very candid about that. If we really are going to get people out and about and passionate and really believe that their voice counts, that their vote counts, then we really need to walk that talk as professionals, as community members, as advocates, as public servants, as preachers, speakers, whatever we may be, whatever your shoe is. I think there's room to be very intentional about ensuring that the people's voices are heard and acknowledged and honored. Because again, for me, coming from a country that, voting is, let me take it back. Coming from a continent, I often talk about Afro-politics. People are like, oh my God, the voting system is so, it's so problematic. I'm like, it's problematic everywhere. It's just, in my experience in the US, corruption is very finessed. Let's be honest.
Say it again.
At least Afro-politics, they're very blatant in your face. They're like, ha, you thought I was stealing the votes. Maybe you should have stolen better. Whereas here, no, seriously, let's be honest. Look at, Google it. And somewhere they'll rephrase it, but it's basically, oh, you think I'm stealing votes? My dear, do a better job of stealing. Whereas here, right, it's like, yeah, I'm stealing the votes, but I'm gonna make you think that you did the thing. Or when I see you're not aligning, I will be innovative in how I tell you how to vote. And we just saw that recently with the challenge of Councilman Lamont. We saw that. And as uncomfortable as it may be to address, for those who care enough to be here in this space, I think it's important that we continue the conversation, because it's not just about him, it's about the systems and structures that uphold the status quo of corruption and misrepresentation of the people's needs. And so with that, I will wrap up with this EJ plug as always. It's important to care about your environment. Quick plug for Article 1, Section 27, that does say that every Pennsylvanian across this Commonwealth has a right to clean air, pure water, and a safe environment. Every one of them, including those who are incarcerated. And that's a whole other sidebar we can have. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
A trained community organizer, adult educator, talk show host, nonprofit leader, YPOC, Young Professionals of Color, revenue cycle expert, and diversity champion. Please welcome Dr. Kimeka Campbell.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you guys got to be here this evening. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to this topic of making sure that people understand that they can vote, that they're not intimidated to vote, and they're also not intimidated to run for office. And that is something that I want to focus my comments on today. Recently, and my best friend Ann is here, recently we had a situation in the community, we've had several situations in the community where folks have been able to use legal means to kick people off of ballots. And this is a very interesting intimidation tactic that we don't address enough in the community, but it's become a staple in the toolkit of how people address politics in our region. Now it happens a lot of places. So this is not something that's unique to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's not unique to Dauphin County. However, it is something that is in our community disenfranchising Black and brown candidates, Black and brown women candidates in particular. And so when we talk about making sure that we ensure people's rights to participate not only in free and fair elections by way of being a voter, we also need to consider how we address people's rights or the privilege, or whatever you want to call it, to run for office. So this is something that I think we kind of talk about in the shadows a little bit, and we whisper about it because it's really hard to prove, right? It's really hard to prove that folks are enacting very coordinated campaigns to kick candidates off the ballot. It's hard to prove, unless you're paying attention.
Yes.
So if you are paying attention, that's why I always tell folks, we don't just want to pay attention to who is running for office. We don't want to pay attention to just those folks, or pay attention to who are the loudest people out in the community making a lot of noise. You know, namely me, I make a lot of noise. But we also want to pay attention to some of these silent folks who are operating, who call themselves operating behind the scenes of these coordinated efforts that only serve to disenfranchise and intimidate and scare people from running for office. That's why the work that Lead PA is doing is so important, because it is one of the organizations that is actually focusing on that access for working people, for people who do believe, right? There's a reason why that language is like that in their mission, who believe that there is some kind of established cobble of political domineering factors and people and structures that would stop you from running for office, right? There's money behind it. There are resources. There are people in place, and folks feel like they cannot break through those barriers to run and successfully run for office. I know a couple of people who have been kicked off ballots 3 and 4 times in this county alone, trying to run for office. They've had to move out of certain areas in order for them to actually be successful. The energy, right? Because it takes a lot of energy. This work is not for the faint, it's not for the weak, it could be for those people who made it make it so hard. We could build up the strength and build up our endurance to do work like this, but folks get tired and they don't want to have to fight, and they don't want to have to beg, plead, scrape in order to fulfill a dream of service. Because these positions are about service. This is not about, or shouldn't be, about who can maintain the most control over federal, state, and county and municipal dollars that flow in certain directions. Okay, just want to say that. Second, personally witnessing barriers. So what we just experienced in our community is Lamont Jones, who is on the ballot. He won the primary, one of the 3 seats to be a council person for the city of Harrisburg. This to be on the November ballot this fall. He was challenged. I mean, it's not even a good word because it was a terrible challenge. So he was challenged he was sued, and along with the Dauphin County Bureau of Elections, for him to come off the ballot, because this is a very interesting wording, because they needed a kind of wording to make sure that it, I guess, made sense. I'm not even sure why it even made it into court, but they wanted to sue to get him off the ballot because he was a returner, actually somebody who not just returned, but had returned to the community from being out of the community due to being incarcerated. And they said that it was even though he won the primary, he would not be a viable councilman once seated, and that he would be challenged then. And because of this idea that it could possibly happen that he could be challenged then, once he won because in Harrisburg it's a mostly Democratic city, so once a Democrat wins in the primary, they usually win in November. I've looked through the history of this, you rarely see that go another way. So they said, we think we are challenging because he won't be a viable candidate, and it would overturn the will of the people if he was elected in November and then removed from office in January. Now, that sounds very convoluted to you, but it makes perfect sense to me if you're following. It doesn't make perfect sense to me, but it makes sense for you. If you're following how people seek to, trying to be as politically correct as possible as people are recording. If you are seeking to make sense of how you would disenfranchise someone, that's the kind of thing that you do. You may use this convoluted language that gets people going. Well, wait a minute. Is the will of the voters in danger? Is that what we are fighting for now? Wait, let's look at what they used to kind of make this case. They used the case from another region of the state where the man who was convicted of a crime resigned, went to prison, took his name off the ballot. He won anyway because the people, that's who they wanted to vote for. And then they took him to court to be taken off the November ballot, the general election ballot. And the man was where? In prison. So they used the case of a man who was at that point currently incarcerated to make a case for a man who had not been incarcerated over 20 years. This is an important thing.
Yeah.
This tells me how you think about people who return to our society.
Yeah.
You think of them as still incarcerated. You think of them as forever soiled from ever being leaders in their community. And that is something that we have to address as a community. To me, that case should be a case study for every single community that has diverse populations. And I'm not just talking about Black men, because Lamont just happens to be a Black man.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about any person. This applies to any person who has ever served time ever. I in my heart, I'm an abolitionist. I think there's a different way to do policing and prisons because of matters like this, because these are the people that got caught up in those kinds of systems. This person came back to this community, committed a crime, served their time, paid their fines, costs, and restitutions, and is still being punished up until literally 2 Tuesdays ago. We're standing here on a Tuesday. It was 2 Tuesdays ago, being dragged back into court, having to pay court fines, fees, having to hire a lawyer, having to be stressed out, having to do all of this extra work because someone believes that they should still be punished for a crime that they already paid their time and did their time for. That's a problem for me personally. And it should be a problem for each of one of us personally. And it should be a problem in our community. If we say that people can be rehabilitated, if we say that there is a cost to a crime that you can pay, right? If we say that we have all these things. If you're a non-violent offender, Lamont was a non-violent offender. If you didn't do certain types of crimes, we put all kinds of caveats around it. We make every carve out, and the person meets all those criteria, and this could still happen to them. We really need to take a hard look, because you know what? You know how the saying goes: if they can punish a Lamont and we do nothing, they're just going to creep up the ladder until it gets to one of us, until it gets to the Autumns, till it gets to the Keontaes, till it gets to all these people who have tried to run and have been removed from the ballot for various reasons. I've been to these court cases, I've watched them with my own eyes, and I've seen the disenfranchisement, I've seen it. So, I'll calm back down. So yes, I think I did the part where I said, we talked about underscoring why it's important to stand up for these threats to democracy. Because one, you shrink the pool of candidates when we continue to this is why we started Who's Running for Office at YPOC, because we don't just want to talk about voter registration, we want to talk about voter activation. In this city, we have 33,000 registered voters, and barely 20% of them vote. Barely. If we had a voting populace in the city, it would change the electorate in the county, but we don't. And they are very well aware of that.
Absolutely.
Very.
Second, we talk about voter education because people don't understand. It is difficult to understand how people would challenge a Lamont who they see as a leader in their community. It's difficult to understand how they would challenge a Shayla Ellis that don't understand the laws and how the laws are legal. I want to be very clear about this. It is legally used to disenfranchise. This is an important thing. Legally used. We have handwriting experts in court who will swear under penalty of perjury that the two signatures they're looking at don't match, and those signatures get thrown out when those people literally are the same people who signed. It's one person who signed that ballot and who signed their driver's license, and that's what they're looking at, and that person's vote gets thrown out from their petition, all right? They're disenfranchising voters at that level as well. That's a very important level at which voter disenfranchisement is happening. But we don't call it that because we say, well, it's legal. We can't do that. We can throw you off because those signatures don't match. So no matter how much we talk, we have to train people in our communities. We have to help them understand the whys. People are nervous from even signing those petitions because they understand what's happening in the community. They know what's going on, but they're scared to even say, right? So training and activating and educating voters on how to even approach these, what is in most places very passé, very normal courses of action when it comes to voting and to getting folks on the ballot. This stuff is normal. But here in Harrisburg and in places like Harrisburg across the state of Pennsylvania, even getting your name on the ballot is a contested, largely contested, it's a battleground at that point. There are so many people in this room and people across the county, across the state, that you look, why would you run for office? Well, let me tell you about the time my friend got kicked off the ballot and they sat systematically one by one and examined every signature, and because she didn't have a signature expert to counter their signature expert, because she couldn't afford one, all her votes got thrown out. Let's talk about those times, and let's talk about how much it's happened over just the 14 years I've been here in Harrisburg. I'm new. Think about, this has been happening way before me. So this is important for that reason. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more in a little bit. That was more subject.
Thank you, Kimeka.
Absolutely.
Our first representative, Representative Justin Fleming, represents the 105th District of Dauphin County and is a former Susquehanna Township Commissioner for the 5th Ward, and in that role for 8 years. So please welcome to the stage Representative Justin Fleming.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me this evening. You know, when we come in and we get the literature, it says your democracy story, and stories are important. Narrative is important, right? And part of the reason why I'm up here is because of stories my father told me. Stories my father told me about how difficult it was for my great-grandmother to exercise the franchise in Huntsville, Alabama. Stories that I've been told by my family members about that difficulty and why it was the reason that my great-grandmother came to Pennsylvania, came to Susquehanna Township, Edgemont specifically, if you're familiar with it, and laid down roots that have continued to grow. And, you know, the manifestation of that now is her great-grandson being the state representative for that area. And so that's important. What we're talking about, you know, legitimizing our democracy and participation in democracy on a large scale is important. There was a great point brought up earlier about civics, how the lack of civics education is detrimental to our society, because you know what? We all have rights and responsibilities as citizens and residents of our areas, our counties, our states, our nation, that our kids don't even know about because it is no longer being taught. I had a civics class in 8th grade, and it really helped pique my interest in government. That, along with my dad always watching the news and me being a nerd, turning into a nerd about politics and government and things like that. But so I am absolutely in favor of anything that is going to help more people access the ballot. The more people that vote, the more it legitimizes our democracy. It certainly didn't get as much attention, but we had a similar situation in Susquehanna Township where somebody who lost at the ballot box was then appointed to our school board. And I was furious. It absolutely infuriated me. So this person has served for 2 years on our school board after losing at the ballot box. And I'm happy to say that I hope that, in Susquehanna Township, we'll elect a new school board, and that member and the members who were responsible for that will all be replaced. Because the will of the voters needs to be what takes place. When people need to have the confidence that their vote counts, that their vote matters, that their vote will not be arbitrarily dismissed or thrown out. And so I appreciate having the time to be with you today and talk about these issues, both on a local level and on a larger federal level. The things that we see in things like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the new Voting Rights Act that is in this session of Congress, we need to act on those things immediately and again, instill confidence that our system works, that democracy matters, and that we actually elect the leaders that the populace chooses. So thank you very much.
Our last speaker this evening represents the 103rd District. You may know her. She is a member of the Climate Caucus and a former member of Harrisburg City Council from 2006 to 2012. Please welcome to the stage Representative Patty Kim.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see everyone here today. Again, my name is Patty Kim, and wanted to talk about a poll. 70% of Republicans think that the election was stolen and Trump should be president. 70%, a recent poll, guys. I was an alternate elector in 2021, and usually we vote, I was never an elector, but usually you vote in one of the chambers in the House, and you vote for the popular vote, and we were gonna go there and vote for Biden. As you know, there are rumors of a fake electors maybe coming out and screwing up the system. So as an alternate, we were all bused to a secret location. It was cold and rainy that day. It was just surreal. And we were bused to the forum, still wearing masks and social distancing. But that surreal moment, I knew that something shifted in our democracy, where electors couldn't safely go and vote for their president because there could have been some kind of insurrection. I don't know. In that same election year, 2020, I was running for re-election, and we had redistricted our districts. And Harrisburg was split up. 60% was in Cumberland County and 40% in Harrisburg. And just hearing and seeing the body language of the folks on the West Shore, ooh, I'm gonna run for state rep because people in Harrisburg don't vote. You could just feel it. So the folks in Cumberland County were coming out saying, we got this, we got this. And I was so proud of Harrisburg. Voter turnout can always be better. But in that year, it was 50%. They showed up and they showed out and voted for the people that they want so that they could shut the mouths of the West Shore saying that these folks don't vote. And so that undercurrent of racism, stereotype is prevalent as you cross the river, and we all know that. The message I want to talk about today is that we have to stay vigilant and vote wisely. I'm very, very proud that we voted down an election denier, the name of Doug Mastriano. We voted him down hard. And Shapiro is our governor, as you know, obviously. But thank God, because other candidates, election deniers won. But we kept him out, and we should be proud of that. And we have to continue to do that. I have co-sponsored, supported every legislation that would make it easier for voters to vote. In the Act 77 law, the no excuse mail-in ballots, we did not put in any regulations on ballot boxes. And a couple of years ago, the Secretary of State had to fight Berks County, where they wanted to put an armed guard next to the ballot box to make sure that the person who was submitting their ballot was the same person. So the Secretary of State had no power, but had made recommendations that we should just put cameras, you don't need to put an armed guard, it's voter intimidation. So folks here are educated, I can tell. If you know our history, we'll know the tactics that they're trying to do now, because it just kind of recycles and just trying to put up barriers to make sure that Black and brown folks don't vote. And it's disgusting. So I have supported, and I know Justin has well, in co-sponsoring any legislation, let's say pre-canvassing, so counties can count their ballots instead of on the day of. People get kind of confused, especially the Republicans. You know, why do all the Democrats start winning overnight? Because they're counting the mail-in ballots, folks. There's no conspiracy theory. So if they can count the ballots beforehand and have those results out, there won't be this major shift to Democratic candidate overnight. Nothing bad is happening, folks. We would love to support, high school voter registration drives, avoiding, what is this? Removing a barrier, like avoiding the secrecy ballot. Guys, seriously, if you don't have a secrecy ballot, your vote doesn't count. Like, come on, guys. Same day registration and voting, making election day a holiday, all those things to make it easier for folks to vote. And so Justin and I are out there on the front line, staying vigilant. We want you guys to vote wisely to make sure that our democracy is safe and sound.